If you play this piano, I'll marry you. The words spilled out like a careless taunt, intended to humiliate, but they would turn a glittering night into a story no one could forget. The ballroom at the Whitmore Plaza glowed with extravagance. Crystal chandeliers showered the room in golden light, polished marble floors reflected every shimmer, and the wealthy elite mingled with glasses of champagne in hand. Laughter floated in the air like smoke, thin but heavy. At the center of it all stood Leonard Drake, a billionaire whose fortune was matched only by his arrogance. Leonard thrived on attention, and he had built his reputation on belittling others as much as flaunting his wealth. But in that room, invisible to most, was a man sweeping up stray crumbs from beneath linen-covered tables. His name was Elijah Turner. He was 51 years old, tall but slightly stooped, with strong hands that bore the calluses of hard work. His uniform was a plain gray custodial suit, clean but worn at the elbows. He moved quietly, eyes lowered, blending into the background of wealth that had never been his. What the guests could not see was that Elijah once carried a gift greater than any treasure displayed in that room. Years ago, he had been a pianist of uncommon talent. The piano had been his voice, his safe place, his joy. But life has a way of pushing dreams aside when tragedy strikes. When his younger brother died in a car accident, Elijah stepped away from music to care for his grieving mother. Work became a necessity, survival became priority, and the piano keys grew cold. Still, he never stopped hearing music inside him. That night, near the stage, stood a grand piano. A black Baldwin, glossy as glass, more a symbol of elegance than an invitation to play. Leonard rested one hand on its lid as a cluster of his companions gathered around. Among them was Julia Hayes, a woman in her 40s with sharp intelligence and quiet grace. She didn't laugh at Leonard's cruel jokes the way others did. Instead, she often observed, measuring the world in silence. Leonard tapped the polished lid of the Baldwin. "Beautiful instrument, isn't it?" he said, loud enough for the crowd. "Though I'd wager not a single soul here could do it justice." Julia arched an eyebrow. "Including you?" Leonard smirked. "I don't waste time with hobbies. Music entertains the masses. Wealth commands respect. That's what separates men like me from the rest." A ripple of laughter followed from his circle, but Julia only folded her arms. Out of the corner of her eye, she noticed Elijah had paused in his work, his gaze fixed on the piano for the briefest moment. His expression carried something raw, something yearning. But then he bent again, trying to disappear into his task. Leonard noticed too. His grin widened. He thrived on drawing blood. "Hey," he called sharply. "Custodian." Elijah straightened, setting his broom against the wall. "Yes, sir." "Tell me," Leonard said, tilting his head. "Do you play this thing? Or is scrubbing floors your only performance?" The group chuckled. Julia's stomach turned. Elijah hesitated, then answered softly, "I used to play." "Oh, used to," Leonard repeated, loud enough for the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, did you hear that? Our janitor once tickled the keys. Imagine that." The laughter grew louder, but Julia's eyes lingered on Elijah's face. She could see dignity there, even in the face of ridicule. Leonard wasn't done. "Tell you what," he said, his voice dripping with mockery. "If you sit down right now and play something worth hearing, I'll give you something priceless." He paused, savoring the moment. "If you play this piano, I'll marry you." The room erupted with laughter, the cruelty echoing against marble and glass. Elijah could have walked away. He could have swallowed the insult like he had swallowed so many others. But something inside him rose up. A fire that had smoldered for years. The piano wasn't just wood and strings. It was who he was. He stepped forward. Slowly. Purposefully. The laughter began to fade as the guests realized he wasn't retreating. Julia leaned forward, her pulse quickening. Leonard leaned back against the piano, sipping his drink, confident this would end in embarrassment. "Well then," he said smugly. "Give us a show." Elijah sat down on the bench. He placed his hands on the keys, roughened by years of labor yet trembling with recognition. He closed his eyes for a brief moment, breathing in the silence. Then he played. At first, it was one note, then another, tentative, like footsteps on an unfamiliar path. But quickly the melody grew, blossoming into something fuller, richer, alive. Elijah's hands began to move with a grace that silenced the room. The music poured out like confession. It carried sorrow and resilience, love and loss, years of silence and a soul that had never stopped singing. Each chord told a story, a boy who once dreamed, a man who sacrificed, a heart that refused to die. The ballroom stilled. Champagne glasses hovered midair. Conversation ceased. The only sound was Elijah Turner's fingers dancing across the baldwin, weaving a tapestry of pain and hope. Julia felt her throat tighten, her eyes brimming with tears. She wasn't just hearing music, she was hearing a life. Around her, the crowd stood frozen. Even those who had laughed moments ago now stared, wide-eyed, breath caught in their chests. And Leonard's smirk had vanished. The smugness drained from his face as the realization set in, this was no joke. This was genius. Elijah played until the chandeliers seemed to tremble. He gave the room his soul, his years, his truth. When the final note faded into silence, the pause that followed was heavy, sacred. Then Julia began to clap. Softly at first, then harder, until the sound filled the room. One by one, others joined, until the ballroom thundered with applause, a standing ovation that shook the walls. Elijah sat still, his chest heaving, his eyes shining. For the first time in decades, he felt seen. Not as a custodian. Not as invisible labor. But as the musician he had always been. Leonard forced a dry laugh, his face tight. "Well," he muttered, "seems our janitor had a trick up his sleeve." But no one was laughing with him. The eyes of the room were on Elijah Turner, the man who had turned humiliation into triumph with nothing but music. And though Elijah didn't yet know it, this was only the beginning. The applause rang through the ballroom long after Elijah lifted his hands from the keys. For a man who had spent years pushing a broom and avoiding notice, the ovation felt almost unreal. His chest heaved as he sat frozen on the piano bench, unsure whether to bow or retreat. He had not played for recognition, only because something deep inside him refused to stay buried any longer. Julia Hayes rose to her feet, her emerald gown swaying as she clapped with tears on her cheeks. She wasn't alone. Guests who had once scoffed at the idea of a janitor pianist now cheered with genuine awe. Some even whistled, others shouted, "Bravo!" A few women dabbed at their eyes with lace napkins. But not everyone in the room celebrated. At the edge of the crowd, Leonard Drake clenched his jaw, his glass trembling in his hand. He had meant to humiliate Elijah, not give him a platform. Now, the attention that usually belonged to him was stolen by a man in a faded custodial uniform. Leonard forced a smile, stepping forward. "Well, ladies and gentlemen," he said, raising his voice, "what an unexpected treat. Who knew the man scrubbing our floors had such a hidden talent?" The words were meant to reclaim control, but they fell flat. A ripple of disapproval moved through the guests. Julia's eyes narrowed at him. She had seen his arrogance before, but tonight it looked like something uglier, envy. Elijah stood slowly, giving a small nod to the crowd. He wasn't used to applause. He wasn't used to being seen. For a brief moment, he locked eyes with Julia. She gave him a look that wasn't pity, but respect. A silent acknowledgement that what he had shared was something rare and real. The moment was interrupted when Leonard clapped Elijah on the shoulder with false cheer. "Well done, my friend," he said. "But let's not forget, this is a gala, not a concert hall. Let's enjoy the rest of our evening." The crowd reluctantly returned to mingling, though many cast glances back at Elijah as if he had somehow shifted the air in the room. Julia lingered a moment longer, then approached. "That was extraordinary," she said softly, her voice carrying the weight of sincerity. "Where did you learn to play like that?" Elijah hesitated. He wasn't used to questions about himself. "I taught myself, mostly. Played in churches, small places, when I was younger." Julia tilted her head. "You've kept it hidden all this time?" Elijah gave a small shrug. "Life has a way of pushing some things aside." Before Julia could reply, Leonard returned, interrupting them. "Julia, leave the man be. He's probably late getting back to work. The floors won't clean themselves, will they?" The word stung, but Elijah stayed silent. Julia, however, bristled. "Perhaps you should let him decide that," she said firmly. Leonard's smile tightened, but he said nothing more. That night, after the gala ended and the last champagne glass was cleared away, Elijah returned to his routine. He emptied trash cans, wiped tables, and stacked chairs. But the echoes of applause followed him with every step. For the first time in years, he felt something stirring inside him, a spark of the man he once was. The next morning, Julia couldn't shake the memory of Elijah's music. She had attended dozens of galas, heard world-class performers, but none had moved her the way his playing did. She made a few calls, discreet inquiries. If Elijah had been a musician once, perhaps the world deserved to hear him again. Meanwhile, Leonard brooded. At breakfast the next day, he vented to a friend. "Can you believe it? A janitor upstaging me in my own ballroom. I give the man a stage out of kindness, and he makes a fool of me." His friend chuckled nervously, unsure how to respond. But Leonard wasn't laughing. His pride had been wounded, and pride was something he valued even more than money. Days passed. Elijah returned to work, expecting life to slip back into routine. But whispers followed him. Guests who had attended the gala told others about the janitor who played like a genius. A video recorded on someone's phone began circulating quietly online. By the end of the week, strangers were asking to hear "The Man at the Whitmore Plaza Piano." One evening, as Elijah finished polishing the lobby floor, Julia appeared. She wasn't in a gown this time, but a simple coat and scarf. "Elijah," she said, "do you have a moment?" He straightened, surprised. "Of course, ma'am. I wanted to ask, would you consider performing? Not here, not as a spectacle, but properly. In a hall, with an audience that comes to hear you." Elijah blinked. "Me? No, I couldn't. I'm no professional. I haven't been on a stage in years." Julia smiled gently. "That's not what I heard the other night. What you shared was more than performance, it was truth. And people need to hear it." Elijah hesitated. Fear and self-doubt tangled inside him. For decades, he had convinced himself that music belonged to his past. Could he really step into that world again? But Julia's conviction stirred something. Perhaps the music wasn't gone. Perhaps it had only been waiting. "I'll think about it," Elijah said finally. Julia nodded, knowing it was a victory just to plant the seed. Meanwhile, Leonard seethed as Elijah's name continued to circulate. He despised the idea of a man he had mocked becoming admired. To Leonard, the world was upside down if a janitor could outshine a billionaire. He vowed to put Elijah back in his place. The chance came sooner than expected. A week later, the hotel announced a winter charity event. Julia, who had some influence on the planning committee, suggested inviting Elijah to play. The idea shocked many, but others, remembering the gala, supported it. In the end, Elijah was offered the chance to perform one piece. When the invitation reached him, Elijah almost refused. The thought of playing in front of hundreds terrified him. But Julia visited again, her voice steady with encouragement. You've spent your life hiding a gift. This is your moment. Don't let fear steal it. And so, trembling but resolute, Elijah agreed. The night of the event arrived. The ballroom filled once more with the city's elite. Leonard lingered at the bar, watching with cold eyes. He couldn't wait for Elijah to stumble, to prove the gala had been a fluke. But when Elijah sat at the piano, something shifted in the room. His hands touched the keys, and once again the music poured out. Stronger this time, more confident. The melody carried not only sorrow but triumph, a declaration that beauty could rise even from hardship. The audience leaned forward, captivated. Julia's eyes filled with tears again, pride swelling in her chest. Even those who had doubted found themselves moved. When the final chord rang out, the room erupted with applause louder than before. Elijah stood, bowing awkwardly, humbled but radiant. He had not just played a piece of music, he had reclaimed a part of himself. Leonard's face burned as the crowd ignored him. He turned away, muttering curses under his breath. For the first time, he realized money could not command respect the way true talent could. As Elijah stepped off the stage, Julia met him with a smile. "See," she said softly. "The world was waiting for you." Elijah shook his head in wonder, still overwhelmed. "I thought my chance was gone forever." Julia's gaze held his. "Some chances never die. They wait for the right moment. And tonight, you proved that." For Elijah, it was more than a performance. It was redemption. The janitor mocked for his place in life had risen, not through wealth or power, but through the undeniable truth of his music. And everyone who witnessed it left changed, reminded that genius can come from anywhere, and that no gift should ever be silenced.